4 years ago, on Christmas night, my family and I were driving back from a fancy restaurant where we'd spent the evening celebrating. I was still wide awake, unlike my parents and younger siblings, who looked ready to pass out from too much food and holiday excitement. The 45-minute drive home felt endless to me. As if that wasn't enough, my little sister was whining non-stop about how her friend didn't get her anything for Christmas. The kind of complaint that would normally make me roll my eyes. But that night, something about it felt different. Maybe even a little ominous. About 20 minutes into the drive, my dad pulled into a gas station to pick up cigarettes, and my mom and younger siblings decided to hop out for a bathroom break. I stayed in the car. I'd already gone before we left the restaurant, and I had a new game I'd downloaded that I was eager to try out. After a few rounds on my phone, I glanced up at the car clock. 10 minutes had passed, which seemed like a long time for everyone to still be gone. I figured maybe they'd gotten held up in a line, or Dad was caught in a chat with the cashier. But the longer I sat there alone, the more I started to feel the weight of the darkness outside pressing against the windows. That's when I felt it. A strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I glanced out the window and froze. There was a man standing under the dim lights by the pumps, staring straight at our car. His face was expressionless, blank in a way that made it hard to tell what he was thinking. The darkness around him seemed to eat up the details, so I couldn't see him well. He looked to be about average height, maybe around 5'9", with an odd, almost stiff posture that seemed completely unnatural. He must have been middle-aged, but that's about all I could tell from my vantage point in the car. When he realized I'd noticed him, he took a step closer. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. Something about him felt deeply wrong. Just then, my dad and the rest of the family returned, piling into the car as my dad apologized, explaining he'd had some argument with the cashier. I barely heard him. My attention was glued to the man outside, who was now glaring at us with a look of clear annoyance. I exhaled with relief as we pulled away, leaving him in the rearview mirror. But even as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. I told myself I was overreacting and tried to push the thought of him away. But as we got closer to home, the unsettling image of his blank face kept flashing through my mind. Later that night, when everyone else was asleep, I lay in bed watching YouTube, with a storm raging outside. I've always loved storms. The sound of rain and thunder usually made me feel safe and cozy, like the world outside couldn't touch me. But that night, the storm only added to my sense of unease. Eventually, I set my phone aside, letting the sound of the rain fill the room as I closed my eyes and tried to relax. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud against the window behind me. I jolted forward, my heart racing. For a second, I thought maybe a bird had flown into the glass. But when I parted the blinds to take a look, my heart stopped. There, standing by our cars in the driveway, was the same man from the gas station. He was drenched from the rain, but that didn't seem to bother him. He was looking up at my bedroom window, his gaze fixed directly on me. When he realized I was watching, he smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that sent a chill through me. The blankness of his face twisted into something sinister in that smile. I backed away from the window, a scream building in my throat. I finally let it out. and within seconds, my dad burst into the room, his face twisted in panic and confusion. "What's going on?" he demanded. I tried to explain, my voice shaking as I told him about the man from the gas station and how he was now outside our house. Dad's expression hardened. He grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet and told me to call the police. As I fumbled with my phone, my eyes kept darting back to the window, half expecting the man to appear there, watching. Within minutes, the police arrived. I heard the muffled sound of their car pulling up, and blue and red lights flashed through the windows. It felt like an eternity before they came to the door to let us know they'd found the man hiding in our shed. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a sense of dread. What had he been planning? Why had he followed us? The officers loaded him into their car, and as they drove away, I caught a final glimpse of him, staring back at our house with that same chilling smile. The next day, my dad and I inspected the property, trying to make sense of what had happened. When we checked the back door, our stomachs turned. The handle was damaged, scratched and twisted, as though someone had tried to break in. He'd been closer to getting inside than we'd realized, and I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if he'd succeeded. To this day, I can't go to a gas station alone without feeling a prickle of fear, and I often find myself double-checking the locks at night, haunted by the thought of that blank, grinning face. It was Christmas Eve during my freshman year of high school. My family had been split up for a while, so we rotated spending Christmas Day and Christmas Eve together. This year, I had come home early from my grandparents' Christmas party, while everyone else was still celebrating at my aunt and uncle's house. Since it was a rarity to have the whole place to myself, I turned down my cousin's offer to stay with me for a few hours. I wanted to watch some new DVDs I'd gotten as gifts and enjoy some peaceful, undisturbed time at home. As I got out of the car, I noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked along the street. It didn't look out of place, just an average sedan parked by the curb. I figured it belonged to one of the neighbor's relatives who'd come over for the holiday. Our neighborhood was quiet, especially on a cold winter night like this. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I didn't give it much thought. Once inside, I locked the door, grabbed some snacks, and nestled down in the living room, trying to enjoy the rare tranquility. With the house quiet and everyone else away, I planned to watch a couple of movies without anyone interrupting. I had barely settled in when a sudden knock on the door shattered the silence. A little startled, I hesitated for a moment, then got up to answer it. Unlocking the door and opening it just a crack, I found a man standing on the doorstep. He looked like an average guy, dark hair, glasses, dressed in a casual jacket and jeans. Yet, something about him set off a strange feeling in my gut. He had this blank expression, his eyes barely meeting mine. "I was wondering about the car outside," he said, glancing past me toward the driveway. "Is it for sale?" A little taken aback, I stammered, I don't think so." He shifted his weight slightly, looking over my shoulder into the house, as if trying to see if anyone else was home. "Is there someone here I can talk to about it?" he asked, his voice low and unsettlingly calm. Nervously, I said, "No, sorry, you can come back another time." Quickly, I shut the door, my heart pounding. As soon as it clicked shut, I locked it, not even caring if it seemed rude. For a second, I stood frozen, waiting to see if he would walk away. But then, to my horror, the door handle jiggled. He was trying to open it. Then came a loud pounding. First one fist, then the other. The sound echoed through the house, each pound louder than the last. My heart was racing. What did this man want? I tried to tell myself that maybe he was just frustrated, but something deep inside me knew that he wasn't here to buy a car. Trying to stay as quiet as possible, I dropped to my knees and crawled away from the door, hoping he wouldn't see me through any of the windows. I reached for the phone, trying to keep my breathing under control. Just as my hand wrapped around the receiver, I remembered the open garage door. My stomach sank as I thought about the door leading from the garage to the laundry room, a door with a broken lock that no one had bothered to fix. A chill ran down my spine as I heard the distinct creak of the garage door opening, followed by footsteps. He was in the garage. I knew if he went through the laundry room door, he'd be inside the house in seconds. Panic surged through me, and I desperately looked for anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy metal paperweight on the coffee table, and I grabbed it, clutching it tightly in my hand. The footsteps grew louder, echoing against the cement floor of the garage. I was about to crawl toward the kitchen to grab a knife when I heard a loud, angry shout outside. Through the living room window, I could see another figure running toward the garage. My uncle. He must have decided to come home early after all. Relief flooded me as I watched him storm into the garage, yelling at the man. The stranger didn't wait. He bolted out of the garage and sprinted down the street, vanishing into the darkness. My uncle chased him briefly, but stopped after a few steps, then turned and headed toward the house, his face a mix of confusion and anger. Once inside, he saw me crouched on the floor, gripping the paperweight, my face pale with terror. I could barely get the words out as I explained what had happened. He sat down beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders to calm me, but I could see the worry etched on his face. I think he was as shaken as I was, though he tried to hide it. I stayed glued to my uncle's side until the rest of the family got home. We called the police, but without a plate number or any identifying details beyond his vague description, there wasn't much they could do. An officer took our statements and did a quick patrol of the area, but the man was long gone. The next day, we inspected the house, checking for any signs of forced entry. When we reached the back door, a small detail caught my eye. The handle was damaged, as if someone had tried to force it open but hadn't succeeded. That simple sight sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. This man hadn't just been knocking to ask about a car. He'd been trying to get inside. I shudder to think what might have happened if my uncle hadn't come home when he did, or if the man had managed to get through the broken lock in the garage. Even now, I often replay that night in my mind, thinking about how close I came to being alone with a stranger who'd clearly had something darker in mind. To this day, I refuse to stay home alone on Christmas Eve, or any holiday for that matter. This happened over 20 years ago. It was Christmas Eve, and I was driving home with my girlfriend at the time. My mother's family used to hold a big holiday gathering at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting my extended family, and I was nervous about how it would go. But she fit right in. All evening, we enjoyed the warmth and cheer of the celebration, laughing, talking, and playing poker, while passing around the usual assortment of holiday cocktails. By the time we were ready to leave, my girlfriend was a little too inebriated to drive, so I took the wheel. It was around 11 p.m. or so, and I was driving her old car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is fairly remote, bordered by farmland and dense, dark forest. A good portion of it is unlit, and that night, with only the headlights to light our way, the road seemed even darker than usual. I wasn't fazed, though. I grew up around here and knew this road like the back of my hand. We were both in good spirits, our conversation light and easy, enjoying the sense of being in our own little world together as we drove through the quiet countryside. It was one of those rare moments that felt like it would stay with you forever. There's a stretch of Highway 211 that dips down a steep hill before crossing Deep Creek. On both sides of this part of the highway, thick forest lines the road, closing in like a dark tunnel. There are no lights in this area. The only thing visible was what the car's high beams could reach. As I drove down the hill, crossed the bridge over Deep Creek, and climbed back up, I suddenly saw movement in the road ahead. Out of nowhere, something darted across our path, so close that I almost hit it. I slammed on the brakes, and we jolted forward in our seats. My girlfriend gasped, and I turned to her, asking if she saw what I just saw. She nodded, eyes wide, but she couldn't tell what it was either. It could have been a coyote. They're common in this area. But something about this didn't feel right. Coyotes don't usually dart out in front of cars like that, especially so close. I felt an odd sense of unease, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. Still, I shrugged it off and kept driving, but something gnawed at me, an urge to figure out what I'd seen. So, in a moment of strange curiosity, I turned the car around, flipping on the high beams to better illuminate the spot where it had disappeared into the woods. Against my girlfriend's quiet protests, I stopped the car, got out, and walked a few steps toward the forest. The air was silent, the kind of shin-biting silence that settles in the dead of winter. I looked around, squinting to see if anything moved among the shadows, but saw nothing unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there, watching me. My heartbeat quickened, and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled with tension. Just then, the blaring sound of the car horn shattered the silence, nearly making me jump out of my skin. But it wasn't a simple beep beep, like my girlfriend might have done if she was playfully urging me back. It was a continuous, deafening beep, lasting several long seconds. Confused, I turned around and hurried back to the car, glancing around as I walked, my instincts on high alert. I opened the driver's door and asked her, "Why'd you lean on the horn like that?" She didn't respond right away. She just looked at me, wide-eyed, her face pale. Then she raised a shaking hand and pointed to a spot about 50 feet away, just at the edge of the forest, where the light from the high beams faded into darkness. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw him. There, standing still as a statue, was a man. He was completely naked, his pale skin smeared with dirt and mud, making him blend almost ghost-like with the shadows. In his right hand, he held something that glinted faintly in the headlights. A hatchet. For a moment, he just stood there, staring back at us with a blank, almost detached expression. Then, as if realizing he'd been seen, he tilted his head slightly, gave us a slow, unsettling smile, and raised his free hand in a lazy wave, as though he were greeting old friends. Without another glance, he turned and slipped back into the shadows, vanishing into the dense forest. A jolt of terror surged through me, and I scrambled back into the driver's seat, slamming the door and locking it in one swift motion. My girlfriend and I stared at each other for a heartbeat before I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see him somehow chasing us down the road. Once we were safely back on the main stretch of the highway, my girlfriend finally found her voice. She explained, her words shaky, what had just happened. While I'd been out of the car, searching in the opposite direction, she'd caught a movement out of the corner of her eye. She saw the man emerge from another part of the forest, closer to the car, almost hidden in the darkness beyond the headlights. She watched, horrified, as he crept silently toward me, his hatchet raised, his eyes fixed on my back as though he was preparing to strike. That was when she'd leaned on the horn, hoping to warn me and scare him off. When we made it back home, we immediately called the police. An officer came to take our statements, but without a clear description and no solid leads, there wasn't much they could do. We never heard any more about the incident, and the authorities never mentioned finding anyone in the area. The officer who interviewed us suggested that maybe the man was targeting unsuspecting travelers for reasons we could only imagine. He even said, rather bluntly, that my girlfriend's quick thinking had likely saved my life. That horn blast let the man know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back to the area recently, and I often find myself driving that same stretch of highway. I haven't seen any sign of the naked hatchet man since, but every time I pass Deep Creek, I feel that same chill creep over me. I keep my eyes trained on the roadside, always a little more vigilant, as if expecting to see a figure emerge from the shadows. After all, if it happened once, who's to say it couldn't happen again?